Mark had never been one to back down from a challenge. Growing up on Earth, he had faced his fair share of tough situations, high-pressure negotiations, intense training, and moments that required him to push past his limits. But nothing had prepared him for his first encounter with the alien warrior, Zelara. He had been assigned to the planet Zorath as part of an intergalactic peace mission. His job was to bridge the gap between Earth and the Zorathians, a species known for their impressive fighting skills and fearsome reputation. Mark knew that the real work would be in the delicate negotiations, but he hadn't expected the Zorathian people to take their tests of strength so seriously. Zelara was one of the fiercest warriors of her people, a towering figure with green skin, dark eyes that glowed faintly, and a body built for battle. She was known for her fearlessness and reputation as a fighter who had never been bested in combat. The Zorathians had made it clear, if Mark wanted to be taken seriously in this new world, he would have to prove himself. It started with a challenge. Mark had just finished meeting with a group of Zorathian diplomats when he was led into the training arena. Standing there, his heart pounding, he saw her, the warrior who would test him. Zelara's gaze was sharp, focused, and it seemed like she could see through him, sizing him up before they even spoke. "You're the human," she said, her voice rich with curiosity, but her eyes held a dangerous glint. "I was told you think you're worthy of our respect." Mark stood tall, doing his best to match her intensity. "I'm here to represent my people," he said confidently, "and I'm ready for whatever challenge you have." Zelara studied him for a moment, her lips curving into a small, almost amused smile. "You're a brave one, but I hope you know that bravery alone won't win a battle." Mark raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think bravery was enough for anything, but it's a good start." The Zorathian warrior stepped closer, her heavy armor clicking with every movement. "I'll make sure to test your limits," she said with a challenge in her voice, stepping into a combat stance. Mark felt the heat rise in his chest. He had been in tough situations before, but standing in front of a Zorathian warrior, knowing she could crush him with a single blow, made his heart race. He didn't know what to expect, but there was something in her presence that both intimidated and fascinated him. "I didn't come here to back down," Mark said, his voice steady as he took a step forward. "If I'm going to earn your respect, I'll need to give it everything I have." Zelara's eyes softened just a fraction, but the smirk on her lips never wavered. "We'll see about that, human." She moved faster than Mark could anticipate. Within seconds, she was upon him, her sword flashing through the air in a deadly arc. Mark ducked just in time, feeling the wind rush past his face as her weapon narrowly missed him. His instincts kicked in and he stepped back, trying to maintain his footing on the uneven training ground. "You're quick," Zelara remarked as she circled him. "I'll give you that, but that won't be enough to defeat me." Mark wasn't a trained warrior, but he had learned how to think on his feet in high-stress situations. He wasn't as strong as Zelara, but he could be agile, unpredictable. As she lunged toward him again, he sidestepped her strike and countered with a quick jab to her side, catching her off guard. She grunted in surprise but quickly regained her composure. "I didn't expect that from you, human," Zelara said, her voice low, her eyes gleaming with respect. "You're different from the others." Mark smiled, but his breath came in short gasps. "I'm not the others. I came here to prove that I can fight beside you, not just stand in your shadow." Zelara's expression shifted, her stern demeanor softening just a fraction. "Prove it," she said, her voice tinged with a challenge. "But don't expect me to go easy on you." They continued sparring, Mark dodging and weaving as best as he could, the sweat pouring down his face. For every move Zelara made, he matched it with his own, trying to anticipate her next strike. It wasn't easy, and it was clear that Zelara had been trained for years in combat. But Mark wasn't backing down. He had something to prove, not just to her but to himself. After what felt like hours of sparring, they both came to a halt, breathing heavily. Mark's body ached, and his muscles screamed for rest, but he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Despite the overwhelming odds, he hadn't backed down. He had fought with everything he had. Zelara stepped back, lowering her weapon. "You're not like the others, human. You have fire in you. That's something I can respect." Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead and gave a small, tired smile. "I'm just getting started." Zelara's amber eyes held a flicker of something, something more than just admiration for his strength. "Perhaps, you might just be worthy after all." Mark met her gaze, feeling something stir between them. A shared understanding, a bond forged not through words, but through their shared strength and willpower. As the sun began to set, the arena grew quiet, and for the first time, Mark felt a connection with Zelara that went beyond combat. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about proving that, despite the differences between their worlds, they could stand side by side. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning of something much deeper. The days that followed Mark's first sparring session with Zelara were a blur of intensity. The Ravenites were an incredible people, strong, proud, and fierce in their devotion to battle and honor. But there was something different about Zelara. She was unlike any warrior Mark had ever met, and their connection, though still unexplored, began to grow with every passing day. Mark had spent the past few days training with the Ravenite warriors. His muscles ached, his body bruised from the constant combat, but every day he felt himself improving. And every night when the sun set, he found himself walking towards the training grounds, knowing Zelara would be there, watching him, pushing him beyond what he thought he was capable of. This evening was no different. Mark was tired, his body worn, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him. He stepped onto the arena, and as usual, Zelara was there, waiting for him. But this time, her gaze was different. It was more intense, more focused, as if she was evaluating him not just as a warrior, but as something more. "You've improved," she said, her voice low and steady as she watched him approach. "But improvement means nothing if you don't learn when to trust yourself." Mark wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes meeting hers. "I think I'm getting the hang of it. I've learned to trust my instincts." Zelara nodded, but her eyes never left him. "Instinct is important, but it is not enough. You must trust your heart, your mind, your feelings." There was a hint of something personal in her tone, something that Mark couldn't quite place. He stepped closer, feeling the weight of her words. "Trust my heart, huh? That's easier said than done." Zelara smiled, a small but genuine expression. "You may be a human, but I see you as something more. You fight with purpose, with heart. It makes you dangerous." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. Dangerous. It was the last thing he had expected her to say. He had always been the underdog, the one people underestimated. But Zelara, she saw something in him that even he wasn't sure he understood. "I'm not sure about the dangerous part," he replied with a grin, trying to keep the conversation light. "But I'm definitely trying my best." Zelara tilted her head slightly, as if considering him with a new perspective. Then, as though making a decision, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them until they were just inches apart. The air between them crackled with an undeniable energy. Her amber eyes locked onto his, fierce and unblinking. "Then prove it, human," she said quietly, her voice a challenge. "Show me what you're really capable of." Mark's breath caught in his throat. There was no fear in her eyes, only a challenge and something else. Curiosity, respect, or maybe it was something deeper, something that Mark didn't quite understand yet. Before he could respond, she stepped back, raising her weapon in a silent invitation. She was ready for him, and it was clear this wasn't just another sparring match. This was a test that meant more than just skill or strength. This was about trust. Mark's heart raced as he quickly readied himself, his hand gripping the practice weapon. The fight began in an instant, with Zelara attacking first, her movements swift and calculated. Mark blocked and parried, feeling the heat of the battle, the rush of adrenaline filling his veins. He was faster now, more confident. his instincts guiding him just as she had taught him. But even with all of that, Zelara was still the superior fighter. "You hesitate," she noted between strikes. "You're still afraid to commit." Mark grunted, dodging another blow. "It's not fear, it's hesitation, I guess. I've always held back, never fully let go." She stopped, lowering her weapon for a moment, her gaze never leaving his. "It's the fear of being vulnerable. That's what holds you back. You can't fight like that, Mark. You have to let go, trust yourself completely." Mark exhaled, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been holding back, not just in the fight, but in everything. Maybe it wasn't just about being strong. Maybe it was about letting himself be seen, allowing himself to fully embrace the unknown. Without thinking, he dropped his weapon, stepping closer to her. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "I've been holding back. I've been afraid to trust, afraid of being vulnerable." Zelara's expression softened just for a moment before her usual fierce demeanor returned. She nodded slowly. "It's the hardest thing to do, but it's also what makes us stronger." Mark's heart raced as he took another step forward, drawn to her energy, to her strength, to the quiet understanding between them. "So, what happens now?" Without answering, Zelara stepped toward him, her body close to his, her presence overwhelming. She didn't hesitate this time. Her hand gently cupped his face, and for a moment Mark forgot about the battle, the training, the fear. All that mattered was this, the soft touch of her hand, the electricity in the air. "Now," Zelara whispered, her voice low, "we trust." And with that she leaned in, closing the space between them, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was soft but powerful. It wasn't just a kiss between warriors. It was a kiss of understanding, of connection, of two people finally letting go and trusting each other completely. When they pulled back, their foreheads rested against each other, breath mingling in the quiet air. "Now you're ready," Zelara said, her voice full of promise. Mark smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He had taken a step closer to her, and now he knew he was ready for whatever came next. Together, they would face it all. The next few days passed quickly, each one blending into the next with relentless training and growing tension. Mark was no longer just an outsider in the Zorathian camp, he was becoming part of it. The warriors respected him now, especially Zelara, who had taken him under her wing. Their connection was undeniable, something neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. But the way they trained together, the way their eyes lingered just a little longer, told them both that something was shifting. Mark found himself looking forward to their sparring sessions more than anything else. Zelara was a challenge, not just in combat but in how she made him see the world. She pushed him to go beyond what he thought were his limits, to trust in his abilities, and to trust in her. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting round of sparring, Mark collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. His muscles screamed in protest, but there was a smile on his face. He had never felt so alive, so challenged. Zelara stood above him, her expression unreadable as she watched him catch his breath. "You've improved," she said, her voice as sharp as always but with a hint of something softer behind it. Mark grinned, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I think I'm getting there. You've been a good teacher." Zelara looked down at him for a moment, and for the first time her gaze wasn't the calculating, intense look he was used to. Instead, there was a flicker of warmth there. "You're stubborn, human, but I like that." Mark sat up, surprised by her words. He had always been known for being a bit too stubborn, especially when it came to fighting. "I don't give up easily," he said, his voice light, trying to hide the flutter in his chest. "I know," Zelara replied, her voice quieter now. She held out a hand to help him to his feet. As their hands touched, Mark felt a jolt of electricity race up his arm, and for a moment neither of them moved. Their eyes locked, and the world around them seemed to disappear. "Zelara," Mark started, his heart pounding. He wanted to say something, to ask her what was happening between them, but the words stuck in his throat. She didn't give him a chance to finish. Without warning, she pulled him closer, her lips finding his in a kiss that was both gentle and demanding. It was everything that had been building between them, everything unspoken. The kiss was a promise, a surrender, a moment of raw emotion that neither of them had expected but both had been waiting for. When they pulled apart, Zelara's breath was just as ragged as his. She stepped back slightly, her eyes flicking away as if she couldn't quite meet his gaze. "We fight well together," she said, her voice steady but with a slight tremor. Mark nodded, his heart still racing. "Yeah, we do." His hands were still shaking from the intensity of the moment. "But there's more than just fighting between us, isn't there?" Zelara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her back to him, walking a few steps before stopping. "There is," she said quietly, "but it complicates things." Mark frowned, his chest tightening. "Complicates things how?" "Because warriors do not allow feelings to get in the way of their duty," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feelings make you weak. They cloud your judgment. And if I let those feelings interfere, I could lose the battle. We could lose the war." Mark took a step toward her, his voice soft but firm. "Zelara, I'm not asking you to choose between your duty and your feelings. I'm just saying that this doesn't make us weaker. It makes us stronger." She turned to face him then, her eyes intense. "You don't understand. I've spent my whole life fighting. I've learned that weakness can get you killed. I can't afford to be weak, not now." Mark felt his heart ache at her words. "Zelara, you're not weak. You're the strongest person I know, but you don't have to do everything alone. I'm here, we're in this together, and that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Mark could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she was torn between her duty and the connection they had. But despite her hesitation, something shifted in her. Her expression softened, and for a brief moment she looked vulnerable. "I don't know how to let go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Mark reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then let me help you, let me in." She looked at him for a long moment before slowly nodding. Maybe I can." They stood there for a few moments, their hands entwined, both feeling the weight of everything between them. The tension, the fear, the doubt, it was all still there. But it no longer felt like an obstacle. It felt like something they could face together. The wind picked up, ruffling their hair as they stood side by side. Mark knew there were still battles to fight, both outside and within themselves, but for the first time he didn't feel afraid. With Zelara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. "You don't have to fight alone anymore," Mark said softly, his voice full of conviction. "Not if you don't want to." Zelara squeezed his hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I don't." The days after that moment between Mark and Zelara felt different, as if something had shifted between them. The tension had gone from being an unspoken challenge to something deeper, something more personal. They trained harder, pushed each other further, but now there was a soft undercurrent to it all. Mark found himself watching Zelara more, noticing the small details, how her hair would fall over her face when she focused, the way she would soften her expression when she thought no one was looking. Zelara, for her part, still maintained the strong, warrior persona she was known for, but Mark saw through it. He saw the moments when her guard slipped, when she allowed herself to be vulnerable around him. And those moments, however brief, meant more to him than anything else. One evening, after another long day of training, they found themselves standing together at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the planet's vast wilderness. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a soft glow over the land below. It was one of those rare moments when the world felt still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark allowed himself to breathe. "You know," he said, his voice breaking the silence, "I never expected to be on a distant planet, fighting alongside a warrior like you." Zelara turned her gaze toward him, her amber eyes reflecting the fading light. "And I never expected to meet someone like you, a human who doesn't fear anything, even when he should." Mark chuckled lightly, glancing at her. I think I've spent my whole life running from something. Fear, failure, not being enough, but with you, I don't know, you make me want to face all of it, even when I'm scared. Zelara's gaze softened just a little, and for the first time she didn't hide the warmth in her eyes. You've been stronger than you know, Mark. Every day you push yourself beyond what I thought was possible. That's more than just bravery. Mark's heart raced at her words. He wanted to say something, something that would express everything he felt, but the words didn't seem enough. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. Zelara noticed his movement and didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer as well, her hand brushing his arm. There was a spark in the air between them, something undeniable, and neither of them could ignore it anymore. I never asked for any of this, Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't ask to fall for you, but here I am, and I don't think I can stop it now. Zelara's breath hitched slightly, her hand resting gently on his. You're not the only one, human. I never wanted this connection. But now I can't pretend it doesn't exist. I can't pretend I don't want it. Mark reached out, his fingers lightly grazing her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. He could feel her heartbeat beneath his hand, a reminder that they were both real, both here in this moment. I don't want to lose this, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to lose you. Zelara's eyes closed for a moment as she let his words sink in. When she opened them again, there was a softness to her expression that made Mark's chest tighten. You won't lose me, she said, her voice steady but filled with something he couldn't quite define. But we must understand something, Mark. I'm a warrior. My life is one of battle. I can't offer you peace. Not in the way you want. Mark nodded, but his heart didn't waver. I'm not asking for peace. I'm asking for you to let me be by your side. No matter what comes next, we can face it together. For a long moment, Zelara didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her gaze deep and unwavering. Mark could see the conflict within her, the warrior who was used to standing alone, fighting alone, and the woman who had let herself trust him. It was a fragile balance, one that neither of them fully understood, but one they were willing to explore. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than usual. Together, she whispered. Mark's heart soared at her words. He stepped even closer, his hand gently cupping her face. This time when he leaned in, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. He kissed her, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, and full of everything they had been holding back. It wasn't just a kiss between a warrior and a human. It was a kiss between two souls who had found each other in the chaos of battle and learned to trust, to care, to love. When they pulled away, Mark rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming in shallow bursts. I don't know what's going to happen, he said softly, but I know I want to be with you. Zelara smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her look even more beautiful. Then we face it together, human. Whatever happens, we fight side by side. Mark smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him. The fear, the doubt, everything that had held him back in the past was gone. He wasn't alone anymore. With Zelara by his side, he felt ready for anything. The wind picked up, tugging at their clothes as they stood there holding each other. The world felt vast, full of challenges, but for the first time it didn't seem so intimidating. Together, they could take on anything. And as the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Mark knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The days that followed Mark and Zelara's first kiss were filled with an intensity neither of them had expected. Their connection had deepened, and each passing moment spent together only brought them closer. But the peace between them was fragile. They both knew the war with the Zorathians. Enemies was still looming over them, and that danger would soon arrive at their doorstep. Despite the tension of what was to come, Mark found himself more at ease with Zelara than ever. She was no longer just the fierce warrior he had admired from afar. She was the woman who had shown him how to fight not just with strength, but with heart. She was the one he could rely on, and he had begun to believe, despite her warrior nature, that she had become the person he could trust most in this galaxy. On the third day after their kiss, Mark stood at the edge of the Zorathian training grounds, watching as Zelara practiced with her blade. The sunlight cast a golden glow over her figure, making her look even more powerful, her every movement fluid and precise. He marveled at the sight of her, even as the heavy weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him. The peace talks had stalled, and they both knew what that meant. War was inevitable. "Enjoying the view, human," came Zelara's voice, warm yet teasing, pulling him from his thoughts. Mark turned to see her standing a few feet away, her stance relaxed but her eyes still sharp. He couldn't help but smile. She knew him too well. "I was just thinking about how much I've learned from you," he said, walking toward her. "I mean, I've trained with plenty of people, but no one pushes me like you do." Zelara raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're not complaining, are you?" Mark laughed softly, shaking his head. "No complaints here, just grateful for everything for you." Her expression softened for a moment, the intensity of her gaze melting into something warmer. She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here, Mark. I didn't expect to need anyone, but you've changed things for me. I don't think I can face this fight without you by my side." Mark's heart swelled with emotion. He had always thought of himself as an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit in anywhere. But with Zelara, he finally felt like he belonged. It wasn't just the way they fought together. It was the way they understood each other without needing words. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zelara's eyes softened, and she reached out to place a hand on his shoulder. "You won't. I'm not leaving you behind." They stood there for a moment, the tension between them giving way to something more vulnerable. Zelara had always been the one in control, the one who led with strength and determination, but Mark could see the cracks in her armor. And in that moment, he knew she trusted him more than anyone else, more than even she realized. "Whatever happens next, we face it together," Mark said, his voice filled with conviction. Zelara nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Together, always." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a loud horn echoing across the camp. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was the signal. The enemy was coming. The time for peace talks was over, and the battle was about to begin. Without saying another word, Zelara turned, her expression hardening once more, the warrior in her resurfacing. Mark followed her, his body tense, his mind racing. He knew the battle would be difficult, but with Zelara by his side, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. She was his anchor, his strength, just as much as he was hers. The camp erupted into action as soldiers began to prepare for the impending conflict. Mark quickly suited up in the gear provided for him, his hands moving with practiced ease, though his heart was still heavy with the weight of the situation. He glanced over at Zelara, who was already moving toward the front lines, her eyes scanning the horizon. Mark jogged to catch up with her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had fought in battles before, but this time felt different. There was something more personal about this fight. It wasn't just a war for survival, it was a war for a future with Zelara. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. Zelara met his gaze, her expression serious but with a hint of something softer behind her eyes. "I've been ready for this my whole life." Mark felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for her, for their future, and for the bond they had forged. "We've got this," Mark said, more to himself than to her, but Zelara nodded. "We fight together. We win together," she replied, her voice full of confidence. As they marched toward the battlefield, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of peace, despite the chaos surrounding them. They were in this together, and no matter what came next, he knew they would face it side by side. With Zelara by his side, he was ready for whatever the universe had in store for them. The battlefield was chaos. Mark had been in fights before, but nothing like this. The air was thick with the sounds of clashing metal, the shouts of warriors and the growls of enemies. It felt like everything was happening in slow motion, yet fast at the same time. His heart pounded in his chest as he fought alongside the Zorathians, the feeling of adrenaline fueling every movement. But it wasn't just the battle that had him on edge. It was the fact that Zelara was out there too. They had prepared for this moment for days, the tension building between them, and now, as Mark's feet hit the muddy ground, he could feel it, the weight of what was at stake. Zelara wasn't just a fellow soldier. She was the one who had taught him, who had shown him how to fight and trust. And now, as the war raged around them, they were fighting side by side. Mark swung his weapon with a practiced motion, taking down one of the enemy soldiers. But there was a voice in the back of his mind, a constant reminder to watch his back, to make sure Zelara was still safe. He didn't have to look far. He spotted her immediately, fighting with unmatched precision, her blade flashing through the air as if it was an extension of her body. She moved like a storm, unpredictable and powerful. Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration as he watched her. There was something beautiful in the way she fought, like she was both the storm and the calm. Mark fought his way toward her, ducking under a swing from an enemy soldier before taking him down with a well-placed kick. His heart raced not just from the battle, but from the urgency of getting to her. "Zelara," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the battlefield. She looked over, her amber eyes locking onto his, and in that brief moment everything else faded. There was no war, no chaos, just the two of them. Without a word, she moved toward him, her body a blur of grace and power. Mark barely had time to react before a large enemy soldier lunged at him. But before he could even bring up his weapon, Zelara was there, her sword slashing through the air with lethal precision. The enemy soldier fell to the ground, and in the same motion, Zelara turned back to Mark, her eyes burning with intensity. "Stay close," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Mark replied, his heart still racing from the close call. Together they fought through wave after wave of enemies, their movements synchronized, as if they were two halves of the same whole. Mark had learned from her, but it was more than that. There was an understanding between them now, a shared trust that made them an unstoppable force. Every time they crossed paths in the battle, a glance was all it took for them to know what the other needed. At one point, as Mark swung his weapon to take down another enemy, he caught a glimpse of Zelara. She was facing off against two soldiers at once, her back turned to him. He saw the way they circled around her, the way they were preparing for the final blow. Without thinking, Mark charged forward, dodging an enemy's strike as he sprinted to her side. He didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of her, blocking one soldier's attack and disarming the other with a quick twist of his wrist. The two soldiers hesitated, clearly unsure what to do next, and in that moment Zelara took advantage, dispatching them both in one swift motion. Mark was left breathing hard, his heart pounding as he caught his breath. He turned to her, still trying to make sense of what had just happened, but Zelara wasn't looking at him with surprise or gratitude. She was looking at him with something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice low but tinged with something that Mark couldn't ignore. Mark met her gaze, his chest tight with emotion. "Because I'd do anything to keep you safe." For a long moment, Zelara didn't speak. Her eyes softened, her fierce warrior exterior momentarily slipping. Then, without a word, she stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. "You're not like the others," she said quietly, her voice full of something Mark couldn't explain. He didn't have time to respond. The battle raged on around them, the sound of explosions and shouts filling the air. But in that moment, with Zelara's hand on his cheek and the battlefield stretching around them, Mark realized something. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for her, for them. As if reading his thoughts, Zelara spoke again, her voice steady, filled with purpose. "We finish this together." Mark nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Together." And together they fought through the chaos, their movements flawless, their bond unspoken but stronger than ever. They were no longer just soldiers on a battlefield. They were partners, fighting not just for victory, but for the future they could have, the future they both wanted. As the battle wore on, Mark's confidence grew. The enemy began to retreat, and the Zorathian forces pressed forward, but Mark's focus was always on Zelara. Every time they crossed paths, he found himself smiling, knowing they were in this together. By the time the battle ended, the ground was littered with fallen soldiers, but Mark felt something deeper than exhaustion. He felt a sense of pride. They had fought and won together. They had survived the storm. As the dust settled and the Zorathians celebrated, Mark stood next to Zelara, feeling her hand brush against his. Their eyes met, and for the first time there were no words needed. They had faced the battle together. Now they would face everything else the universe had in store for them, side by side. The battle was over, but the weight of it still hung in the air. The Zorathian camp was quiet now, the chaos of war replaced with the hum of warriors tending to their wounds and gathering the fallen. Mark and Zelara stood together, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits strong. They had won, not just the fight, but something more, something neither of them had expected when they first met. Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead, his hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the battle. He had been in his fair share of fights, but this one had been different. This time, he wasn't fighting alone. He had Zelara by his side. "Not bad, human," Zelara said, her voice low but filled with respect. She wiped the blood from her blade, her eyes never leaving him. "You didn't run. You didn't hesitate." Mark gave her a tired grin. "I had good reason to stay." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You made me believe in something I didn't know I was capable of." Zelara raised an eyebrow, her usual stoic expression softening just a fraction. "And what's that?" "Caring about more than just surviving," Mark said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "You made me realize that there's more at stake than just my own life. There's us, what we've built, what we've fought for." Zelara's gaze softened, and for a moment she wasn't the fierce warrior he had come to admire. She was just a woman, standing beside him, her eyes filled with an emotion he hadn't expected. "I've always fought alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never trusted anyone enough to stand with them, to fight for them. But with you, it's different. I feel like we can face anything together." Mark took a step closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "We can face anything," he said, reaching for her hand. "I don't care what comes next, as long as we're in this together." Zelara didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped into his embrace, her arms wrapping around him as she buried her face in his chest. Mark held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the comfort of knowing they were no longer just two warriors fighting for survival. They were partners, something more, and it felt like the beginning of something even greater. For a long moment they stood there in the quiet, the weight of the world outside them momentarily forgotten. Mark knew that the war was not over, that the challenges they had faced were just the beginning. But in this moment, with Zelara in his arms, everything felt right. They had made it through the storm. Now they could walk into the future together, no matter what it held. "I won't let you go," Mark whispered, his voice filled with a promise. Zelara pulled back slightly, her amber eyes locking onto his. "And I won't let you go either." With those words, Mark leaned in, kissing her softly, his heart full of everything he felt for her, admiration, trust, and something deeper. This wasn't just a kiss born out of the heat of battle. This was a kiss that spoke of everything they had shared and everything they were still about to face. Together. As they pulled away, Zelara's smile was softer than it had ever been. "You know, I never thought I'd find someone like you," she said, her voice teasing but full of warmth. "But I'm glad I did." Mark laughed softly, the sound of it easy and genuine. "I'm glad I found you too." The celebration in the camp started to pick up again, the Zorathian warriors cheering, laughing and sharing stories of the battle they had won. But Mark and Zelara remained standing together, hand in hand, knowing that their journey had just begun. "I don't know what the future holds," Mark said, looking up at the sky, the stars beginning to shine brightly above them. "But I do know that with you by my side, I'm ready for anything." Zelara looked at him, her expression steady and full of confidence. "Together, we can face whatever comes. We'll make our own future human." Mark smiled, feeling the weight of the past few days lift off his shoulders. Whatever came next, whether it was peace, war, or something in between, he knew one thing for certain: he would face it with Zelara. Together. They stood there, the world bustling around them. But for a moment, it was just the two of them. Warriors, lovers, partners, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, Mark felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. With Zelara by his side, he was ready to face the unknown.